Morning, Facebook. Let's start this recording up. What's up, folks? My name's Justin Khanna. Happy Monday. This is the Emulsion, episode 14, and I feel it. I feel it today, because I think today is going to be one of those episodes where we look back on the show and we reference this as a really, really great episode, not just because I'm feeling pretty strong today, but because we have a guest. I will get into introducing him in just a moment, but first up, today's beverage is actually a green tea. I've got a blend of sencha and matcha here. You can see the mug on the video. It's a cute mug. It's one of those awe mugs. My girlfriend's brother and his girlfriend actually got both of us mugs with our little monogram, I guess you could call it. Is that what you call it? When the first letter of our first name. We got that for Christmas this year because they knew we'd be moving in together. Hers is like red and white and has a little A on it. So adorable. But you know what else is adorable? This shirt. I'm wearing, look at this shirt. Isn't that awesome? It is a $9 Michelin Man t-shirt, and it's my new favorite podcasting shirt. It's like an awesome little throwback maneuver. I think this logo is from like the 70s or the 80s. Hit a thumbs up right now if you like my t-shirt. Today's guest is the restaurant columnist for Norway's largest newspaper, Verdens Gang, a writer, radio and podcast host, and all-around food personality. And in addition to designing high-end kitchens, he also runs beingcritical.com, which is a site dedicated to restaurant and reflections on meals. He's even got tips there on how to cram the most Michelin stars into a weekend, or his latest predictions for world's 50 best. Stuff that we talk about on this show quite frequently. He's literally calling in from Norway today, so the time change is a little bit crazy, but I'm super happy to have him on. This has been a long time coming, and I'm going to do my best Norwegian pronunciation of your name. If I butcher it, you just get to hang up. Welcome, André Blomberg-Nygård.
That's very close.
Almost.
It's sort of eerily almost German.
Yeah,
like we lost the war.
It's
very good.
It's that back of the throat noise that I never really got down with Norwegian. How are you today?
I'm great. I'm super privileged to be on, it's always great to be able to come on anywhere and sort of spill my opinions and give my word on whatever's going on. That's what's the most giving part of this job.
Right. I'm super happy to have you. And we met in Norway, actually, to give everybody a little bit of history. He came in to eat at the restaurant, and I had the pleasure of cooking for Andre, and that's more or less how we hit it off. We met most recently in Chicago, had a great meal at Portillo's, little hot beef sandwich, which is great.
Surprisingly good sandwich for the sort of an unassuming place, I thought.
Yep, there's just a lot of weird decor on the wall, and oh man. Anyways, speaking of hot beef sandwiches, what was the last thing you ate that made you smile?
I'm, contrary to perhaps popular belief, I'm a simple man. I take pleasure in sort of simple things, and I had a tub of Ben & Jerry's ice cream.
There you go.
Over the weekend, just with that artificial chocolate sauce on top.
Yep.
That kind of solidifies on your ice cream. So I mean, that's great. I was thinking I was going to say Donut Walt in Chicago, which always makes me smile.
Also super good.
But it kind of goes against one of my pet peeves at the moment, which is the lining up for food. So so I'm leaning towards the Ben & Jerry's.
Right, perfect. I was just gonna say we also had that little point in Chicago where we were talking that you can take just as much appreciation off of a fine dining tasting menu as you can a tub of Ben & Jerry's. So that's why we get along, I think.
Right.
To start off, I'd like to kind of get a little bit of your background, so people can kind of know a little bit where you come from. So maybe we can chat a little bit about you yourself as your career being a critic, and you can just kind of give a little bit of background on how you got into food itself, and then your journey from, because you have a chef background, and then you're a critic, and you're also a designer. So basically, how did you get started? Talk me through it.
Sure. I mean, as you said, I'm originally a cook with some sort of front of house and finance added in along the way. I grew up mainly with my dad being a traveling salesman, so dining out or kind of sitting at the end of the bar while he entertained clients. was sort of what opened the allure of the restaurant. I think when you're the age of 12, the coolest person on the planet is whoever's the bartender making the mocktails for you. So that's kind of where it all started out. I got started in the industry kind of late, at about 19.
Got it.
I heard you talking about sort of walk-on trainees and the Stagiaire programs, or that whole part of the industry, and that's kind of how I got started. I mean, I walked on as an apprentice in a mediocre local Italian restaurant in Bergen.
Got it.
Italian restaurant with not an Italian person working, a French head chef.
Yep.
There was an English sous chef who came from the military, so he was all about cleanliness, and the French guy was all creative. So that's kind of where I got started, picking up extra shifts as a fry cook at late night kind of first generation Tex-Mex place, where our biggest seller was a cheese and nachos and cheese dip, and the cheese dip was just shaved cheese, some salsa, then more shaved cheese, and then in the microwave for I think about 35 seconds. And
Real.
Turn it around, and then another. Yeah.
Real high end.
Original first generation Norwegian Tex-Mex. So that's kind of that, and then I went through Swiss Hospitality College. I worked in London for a number of years, mainly front of house roles.
Sure.
I finally opened my own restaurant in Bergen, which is now probably close to 15 years ago.
So you were the executive chef, or you were a part owner, or how?
Well, I bought a bankrupt sort of institution of a very small, intimate French restaurant, and did it up, and decided that my cooking skills weren't quite good enough for the level of food that I wanted to do. So I hired a chef.
Got it.
And then I did the front of house on the evenings, and we did the prep together in the daytime. And then after about a year, I let him buy 50% of the restaurant, for which he paid all of the money I had invested. So at that point, I was at zero. And we did that for about 3 years, and then he bought me out, and I went on to Oslo to take over as the general manager of a Michelin-starred restaurant in Oslo, which was called Ol, and is no longer there.
Sure.
Unfortunately, it's the case with a lot of Norwegian Michelin-star restaurants.
Yeah.
So that's kind of that. Went on to open my own hotel together with my wonderfully talented wife.
Yep.
Who's originally a pastry chef. And spent some time at Per Se. And then at some point kind of hit the wall and decided enough is enough with these guests and operational issues.
Mm-hmm.
And I wanted to do something else, and kind of branched out on my own. Was asked to be a critic for this newspaper.
So they approached you.
Yeah, they had a general wanting people to apply. They'd had a critic for years.
Yep.
And then they wanted to go in a different direction. They ended up hiring me and my colleague, and we've been there now for 7 years, I think, or certainly 6.
Fantastic.
And the idea was they wanted someone who was an industry person, so that's me.
Mm-hmm.
And then the other person who's a writing person, he's an author, very well known Norwegian author. And so he's a author foodie, and I'm a restaurant person who can get away with writing some stuff.
Yeah, because you've been in it, more or less, right? Like, that's your unique perspective, and then you can... I respect your opinion a lot more because you have the restaurant experience, like there's these people who write about food, and they will sometimes say a quip or two, which is very like guest centric. But I like that you have both sides.
I have no illusions that what I do, and I've had this argument. I had this argument with Elizabeth, and I'm gonna butcher her last name.
Mm-hmm.
I think her last name is Olbach or something. She's from Holland and writes Elizabeth on food. And we had this discussion. We've had it several times. I mean, I have no illusions that what I do as a critic is write a good story. If I stop writing a good story, then I will be out of a job.
Right.
That doesn't mean that I have to write scolding reviews or necessarily blow smoke up someone's behind.
Yep.
if I can write a good story about a mediocre meal, I'll still be in the money.
For sure, for sure.
So that's kind of, I write, and I've had this discussion with chefs in the past. I write about going to restaurants for people that go to restaurants or consider going to restaurants. I don't write about running restaurants for people who do that.
Yep.
So, but not being anonymous, it's not impossible to get a hold of me, and sometimes chefs do.
For sure.
We might go through my notes together from a different perspective, but the articles are, of course, meant to be there for the dining audience.
Got it.
I find a lot of the time that chefs will say that my colleague who then writes the other week, so we write every other week, they will just flat out say that he's wrong, but they will disagree with me.
Okay.
Which I think is a difference.
Yep. Because there's that mutual like respect, at least, that like.
Yeah, and I mean we can have discussions about emulsions.
Yep.
I love the name of your podcast
Yeah.
because it's one of my pet peeves
Right.
at the moment. I really despise emulsions. And then these are the sort of things that when you go out and dine a lot, and certainly if you have a base level knowledge, some of these trend words can just start rubbing you the wrong way.
For sure. And then that journey from writer, when did you start more or less getting into the design game? And we can just briefly talk about it, just because I want to kind of like highlight it as something that a chef can do, you know? Yeah.
So I started about 3 years ago. I work for a local company here. We were sort of a sales agent for a bunch of different factories around the world. And so I designed professional kitchens for mainly restaurants, but also hotels, institutions, that sort of thing. They were, I think all of my colleagues there were a fairly large operation. I think all of my colleagues there are old chefs of some sort. I mean, some guys have worked in hospital kitchens for 15 years and really know that game. And
right.
Some of us have worked in restaurants. And so it was a case of, I think there's an advantage to being a people person. Which, let's face it, not all chefs are.
True story.
So there's an advantage to that, and then it's just a case of teaching yourself computer-assisted drawing.
Got it.
And get going.
I wish I could do that. I feel like I could have a lot of really good fun with that, but like just being able to play around and put things exactly where you think they should be, as opposed to like, because...
I mean, you've seen chefs over the years, I'm sure, throw tantrums over the langoustines being too small when they come at the back door or whatever. Imagine the amount of rage they can get into when there's deliveries of $300,000-$400,000
custom made.
Yeah. So I mean, you get to deal with chefs every day.
Right, for sure. That's crazy. So back to the critic part. Maybe we can just go in a little bit of a conversational jam session about more or less like what you're excited about and maybe not so excited about. I know you kind of mentioned previously like standing in line for a meal,
Sure.
And then maybe just kind of go into the current state of the industry, because you're in it. You're still eating out quite regularly. So what are you excited about, and then maybe what are you not excited about at this current 2017 moment?
Well, I gotta tell you, as far as being super excited about something, I'm super excited about this summer. I'm going to Spain with my family.
Amazing.
We have a small little apartment near Marbella, and I'm going to be cooking a lot of local seafood for my family.
Fantastic.
And, I think that's the core of the whole chefing game, which I'm allowed to get more into now that I don't do the 15-hour days cooking, and I don't smell like onions when I come home.
Exactly.
So there's more inspiration in that. As far as the industry, I think it's we're in a bit of a difficult spot, to be honest. I think, as you said, I'm not excited about lines. That seems to be somewhat derivative from Instagram, Twitter, Facebook, that sort of thing, where you're building up some individual places.
You get the hype going.
Yeah, you get a ridiculous amount of hype that you didn't get in the past. Some of these places are only marginally better than others, and I decided, I think at the turn of this year, as a New Year's resolution, that I'm not going to be lining up for a marginally better burger or marginally better ramen or whatever it might be. I draw the line at donuts because the line at Donut Vault isn't really that long.
It's not that bad.
It's not that bad if you're a morning person like me, but yeah, I mean, I'm not sure that there is a correlation between the amount of hype that people are able to generate for their restaurants and the actual quality that comes out of the product. And I think, there's an element of the industry that's not very often talked about, and it's the financing bit.
Right.
Which tends to be quite cyclical in its in the way it works. So in order to open these elaborate restaurants, you need someone with that's going to back you, an investor or a bank or that sort of thing.
Yep.
And they tend to be very cautious about putting their money into the business of restaurants. Normally, they'll put their money behind sort of proven concepts.
Yep.
Which I think is part of the reason why we're getting a lot of cookie cutter restaurants at the moment.
Sure. They just pop up all over the place.
Yeah, and it feels like you've been to this place before.
Yeah.
Because they all kind of look the same. And of course, the problem with this is by the time investors have gotten on board and they've started putting money into it, they make some sort of copy of something that was successful, and probably a lot of their success was, I shouldn't say probably, but perhaps a lot of the original success was due to a good marketing campaign or social media guerrilla campaign.
Right.
And then they get behind someone who's third or fourth in line to do a very similar concept, and then they ultimately fail. And then for the next cycle, these investors will be more cautious, and we just keep on ending.
Sure.
We end up sort of pushing the money further away.
Right.
By just trying to do what the other guy was doing.
Yep.
So I mean that's where I am as far as that goes. I've listened to some of your podcasts prior to coming on here.
Yep.
And you touch on some of these issues as well. And
yeah, it's a big thing right now. Like the industry's in 100% weird place. Like there's all these articles coming out about the restaurant industry has a bubble and it's about to burst. All these places that ended up, riding that trend or, using that social media hype to get either a line formed or just get people sharing about their stuff. Right. And it ends up being very easily replicatable. And, then rent prices go up or people don't have as much hype anymore. And then how do you kind of survive after that? So I'm with you. It's definitely, I agree that it's going in a weird place. So I want to bring up a quick news article, as we normally do on this show. There's an article that Eater did that more or less references this, and it's all about Paul LeBrandt. I sent it over to you. I don't know if you got a chance to read it.
I've actually heard I've listened to the podcast.
That podcast, yeah.
Eater podcaster.
Yeah, so Eater does a podcast called Upsell, and they had Paul LeBrandt on it, which, if anybody doesn't know, he was from Cortone, and then he was most recently at the Elm, that closed almost 2 years ago. But he's kind of like out of a job. He's doing consulting for other restaurants, and the article actually references just all about how he doesn't want to do a restaurant right now because of the current, I guess you could call it, economic atmosphere. Like you said, a lot of investors are nervous and I'm going to quote, investors are sitting there and they want to do stuff, but they're still a little unsure with regards to the economy in this country and in this city. And he's referencing New York, of course. Was there any other good nuggets out of that podcast that you got?
I think he's, of course, he's also a bit leery about the thing that, if there is opportunity, he's going to go for it, which I think is true for most chefs.
Right.
I mean, everyone's just waiting for that opportunity. which that's not necessarily a good thing, because when opportunity comes, it might be too late.
Yep.
Because these investors are slow to get out of the boat.
Mm-hmm.
And we've seen a lot of restaurants that have come over the last few years that have less money invested into them. They feel more like sort of makeshift, put together by enthusiasts kind of rooms, more than the design through Adam Tiani or David Collins or that sort of expensive designer feel. So, and I mean, you were here in Norway for a period of time, and I think we've had perhaps too many of these sort of I like to call them hipster restaurants, of course, which is they kind of, there's a conscious decision to look as casual as you possibly can,
right?
Which I think kind of negates the idea of being casual. I mean, if you've had to go through how to get casual enough in the morning, you're not being casual about it.
Yeah, I hear you. And it goes back to that, like, being able to see what everybody else's restaurant looks like just by looking at their website or their Instagram, as opposed to actually having to go there and experience the room. You end up kind of like copying and pasting things without getting context sometimes. But back to Scandinavian stuff, because you have a very interesting bit on kind of like Nordic style dining. Sure. And kind of like what makes...
I'm glad you find it interesting.
I do. I really, really do, because it kind of like, it provides justification for a lot of the... Maybe not justification, but it kind of like... You kind of like pull the veil away on a lot of these... the reason that people kind of are running restaurants the way that they're running them, and the reason that the food looks the way that it does. So maybe you can go into a little bit of your 2 cents on that.
Well, I think the New Nordic is kind of the term that's used for all of these restaurants, or certainly the ones who originate here. So, and I think New Nordic has very different implications depending on who you're talking to. So for a chef, for industry people, it's an almost sort of holistic approach to cooking with a sense of being one, or at least very close to your surrounding nature. Ideally, there's a manifesto somewhere in the background, lurking in the background, sort of semi-solid manifesto about how you're going to make the world a better place through your dining experience. But I think for the diner, the perspective's very different. I mean, they kind of identify this as the locally sourced, ideally foraged ingredients. There's going to be a lot of upfront flavors from smoke, pickling, fermenting, salting, curing, that kind of stuff. And then there is, of course, the near comical lack of protein, which goes hand in hand with this. Sort of, if you will, personified by the perfectly cooked piece of root vegetable. That's ominous in all of this. There's the meticulously random plate up, which is a term I think I've coined.
Right.
That it's supposed to look random, but you know, guys are spending hours coming up with this layout for the plate, which goes hand in hand with the number of staff that some of these places employ. I mean, in the old days, the French classical restaurants used to have a ridiculous amount of staff, but it's gone completely overboard with these new Nordic places.
Sure.
And then I think also for the diner, it's that kind of sparsely decorated natural wood centric room with the exposed beams or brick or cement work. And then to top it off, you should probably have the slightly uncomfortable Scandinavian design furniture.
Yep.
And I think that's and I think right there we've just about described 60 to 75% of all self-respecting restaurants that have opened in the last 3 to 4 years.
I was going to say 75, but that's probably closer. It's probably a little bit lower than that. There's a few places that are doing it differently, but I just think that's a hilarious kind of like view into...
And I've just stopped trying to... So 7 years ago, I would write in my reviews kind of a little... so my reviews tend to sort of follow a ebb and flow. So there's a little bit about sort of an introduction, which is supposed to sum up my expectations before I go there. there's a little thing about the room or how it feels, and then there's a little something, and this might come in different tempo or variation of one thing comes before the other. But I always try to write something about the food as a general idea. So it's generally, what's the food like here? So before that would kind of be it's an Italian place, or
right.
It's a Japanese place.
Yep.
Whereas now, or it might have been that old, tired, it's an international menu.
Yeah.
But now I think it's just it's a modern restaurant, which is all of the above.
Sure.
This is all of these things I've just mentioned.
Yep.
It's a restaurant that have opened in the last 6 months. That's
yep.
what it feels like. That's what the food's like. And that's fine. But the inherent problem of this new Nordic thing is, if you were, and I think I've told you this in the past, I think if you're having escargot, so garlic snails,
right,
for a starter, then you're having beef bourguignon as a main, and then you're having creme brulee at the end. Not only are you having a heavy meal, but you're pretty sure that you're in a French restaurant.
Right.
And it doesn't matter if you're in Singapore and the chef is from Austria. It's still a French restaurant.
Yep.
Now, because of the local identity of the new Nordic, as soon as this travels, it loses its kind of Nordic connection. So
exactly.
I think we're losing out as a region as far as a marketing tool, because you'll have the restaurant I just described. I think you would be hard pressed to say there isn't a lot of difference in what Sean Brook is doing.
Yep.
If you went to the Catbird seat when Trevor Moran was the chef there in Nashville,
who was previously at Noma, for everybody who doesn't know.
Exactly. And now it's to a lesser extent, I think, now with Ryan Foley, who's there.
Yep.
But none of these chefs or restaurants will openly identify as new Nordic restaurants.
But at the same time, they're just like they're like taking a picture of their food and kind of like, I would do this to my friends sometimes, like show a plate and kind of be like, where do you think this food came from?
Exactly.
And there are only, because you could throw up any restaurant in the air and they'd be like, yep, that's probably where that's from. But it's like, no, it's actually from this other place completely on the other side of the world.
Right. Which I think also ties back with what you were talking about in a previous episode with the where in the past Astasia was someone who worked somewhere for 3 to 6 months or maybe even a year. Paul Liebrand talks about it in the Eater Upsell episode as well, about how he stashed for Pierre for a year. And now people do shorter and shorter stints.
Yep.
In a variety of different places. They fill up their CVs with fancy names. And at the end of the day, the only thing that you're able to bring with you is your ability to visually copy what you guys did.
Exactly.
But you're not able to bring the flavor out of it.
And then it kind of like, there's this English game we play in school called Telephone. I don't know if you played it in Norway as well, but you kind of like, everybody sits in a circle and the teacher would tell a message to someone and you kind of whisper it to the person next to you. And then by the end of the circle, you see what the message has become, because it's usually always super fucked up.
Right. It's and I think that's there's the generational gap, because I think when I was a kid, that was called Chinese whispers.
Got it.
It was the whispering thing, and then it just completely changes as it goes through.
Yep, exactly.
And I think also, I think Bonjavin Lee, who writes the Ulterior
exactly.
Epicure. And he has a good piece on that about how the new Nordic is a whole lot of copying each other.
Right.
Which, since he wrote that piece, which has now been quite a few years, has translated into now being the entire kind of semi-self-important dining segment. So
got it.
This isn't a problem for Popeyes.
No.
Or for Morton Steakhouse or Oceanair in Seattle. But this is a problem for every one of these kind of alums that are coming out of these restaurants, and it tends to just copy a lot of their what they've seen, and I'm not sure that the food's brilliant in all of these places.
Because it's easy to copy either an aesthetic or even like you can even read a menu, and as long as you have a basic understanding of like the techniques that they're using, because a lot of the times the techniques that they're using aren't all that complicated. It's roasting, dehydrating, grilling,
Right.
and you can more or less replicate it in a certain way. But there's a certain, I mean, you've eaten at places like Noma and Franzen
Sure.
and like the places that are really on the high end, cutting edge of it, and really may or may not have originated some of these ideas, and where a lot of this stuff stems from, and it's a completely different experience when you really have it well done, and it's a true, at least in my opinion, having had those experiences where you have it and then you go to another place that's more or less playing the imitation game and trying to be so and so. I get
And
it.
I think it's also important to say, of course, that the fact that I've mentioned the catbird seed and Schomburg in this context does not mean that I think those are the ones who are not succeeding.
Right.
Quite the contrary. I think they make good examples because people have heard of them. They are really good places.
Right.
I really enjoyed a dine there with both of them, but there are all over the world, and certainly all over the U.S. that are popping up restaurants that are not necessarily doing this the the right way to the extent that there is a right way.
So I'd like to kind of go more into. We've already talked a little bit about kind of your view on restaurants and how you go about writing a review, but as far as how you choose places to review these days, how do you go about?
So I think what's I wouldn't say unique, but what's different about the way that I write about reviews to how I write my reviews to what was commonly the form in Norway, certainly in the past, is so I have a grade scale from 1 to 6, visually symbolized by a roll of the dice.
And this is something that the newspaper has always had, or you brought this to
Yeah.
the? Okay,
No, so this has originally been with the newspaper for a long, long time.
sure.
And I wanted to just write a story, but the newspaper, they're very much married to these data that they like to give for everything from art to books to restaurants.
Got it.
But 6 different grades is very limiting when you think about you do maybe 50 different restaurants in a year, and you want to be able to separate them.
Yep.
And so we decided very early on that I want to do the grade is sort of given to the restaurants based on how well you succeed with what you set out to do. So
Okay.
everyone's graded based on their expectation, or based on their pretensions, basically.
Right.
So if you have hot dog stand, and it's just a really great hot dog stand, you can still get a 6.
Got it. I like that.
If you have a fine dining restaurant with white tablecloths, but you just suck at that, you can still get a 1.
Yep.
Which wasn't always the case in the past. Certainly when I was in the business myself, if you had white tablecloths and starched staff, which is kind of the part of the business that I've been in, you were kind of guaranteed a 5 and upwards.
Sure.
But of course, doing that requires that you have a base understanding of what's going to meet you when you get to the restaurant. So
Right.
I do a lot of research before I go. Unlike sort of famous contemporaries like the New York Times and whatnot, we don't have the budget to visit a restaurant 5 times.
Yep.
So
It's usually
review
1?
Yeah, it's
Okay.
just based off of 1.
Yep.
So my review is always, and I try to tell people this to as many people as will listen, that my review is one man's subjective opinion
Right.
of one individual night in a restaurant's long and hopefully starred story. So,
Right.
and it's got to be read as such. So it's not the be all or end all of a restaurant, but it's my certainly my well thought through, I like to hope, or I like to think, opinion of that particular night. So, but I try to get an understanding of what I'm gonna get when I get there, and then I sort of judge the kind of the elements that we've talked about. So there's a little bit of the expectation, which is part of the research, and then there's the what does this place feel like? Because I find that the dining experience is so much more than just the food.
Absolutely.
And so what does it feel like? What are the other people like here? And then what's the sense? And then what can you expect as far as food as a general idea? And then I try to get into the whether you succeeded with what you set out to do. So if you wanted to do ramen, does it deliver on those kind of promises? Does it have the intensity of flavor? Is it piping hot? Is it are the ingredients, do they marry well? And I think sometimes that's one of the challenges with this modern cuisine is there tends to be a lot of upfront flavors that are all very intense and interesting on their own. They don't necessarily make a homogeneous dish.
Right.
I think so the worst example of that quite recently where I got one dish, I don't even remember what the different ingredients were, but they were sort of plated one next to each other, and sort of from left to right there was 4 different ingredients, and just visually looking at it you realize this is not going to be a cohesive dish.
No.
It's not even together on the plate. So I mean that's, and I try to, so in Norway most critics are anonymous.
Got it.
I'm not. And that's not to say that I call restaurants in advance and say I'm coming, so bring out your best beef.
Sure.
I tend to book in the name of whoever I'm dining with, because trying to keep,
I was just going to say, do you always dine with someone, or is it's always one person, or it's?
No, it changes from time to time. I have some people that enjoy it more than others, and where I enjoy their company more than others, so they might more frequently get invited.
Right.
I think that kind of just adds to the dynamic of it.
Of course.
Whatever their opinion is doesn't really matter, but it's nice to have someone to bounce your ideas off. A lot of the time the article or the critique gets kind of written as I'm sitting there while we're talking, that sort of phrases that come up in the conversation sometimes end up in the article.
Right. Do you ever has there ever been a situation where you're sitting down with someone, because you go out with other kind of people in that sphere, like the food blogging critic kind of sphere? Do you ever have you had an experience where you go out and another critic is also writing an article on the same place at the same time? Does that ever happen?
I tend to not really go out with a lot of food personalities in Norway. I think most of the time so my dining world is kind of split into 2. So for the newspaper, I submit a number of articles every year. They tend to be very Norway-centric, with sort of sprinkled in maybe 10% of international stuff.
Okay.
But then I also dine a lot for my own pleasure, or for books that I might have contributed to, or other things like that, where the experience is very different. So if I go to New York to eat out, to book a table, you've got to make a proper reservation, and I use my own name. And I'm more likely to get preferential treatment in places like that, where there's a sense of professionalism about Googling your guests, or per se being the extreme example of that.
Absolutely.
In Norway, I'll book in whoever I'm dining with's name, which more often than not is just someone who works at the wine monopoly, or is my neighbor. And then, because keeping track of fake names, I mean, it's impossible. And how many times could I be John Smith before John Smith would get preferential treatment?
Exactly.
So,
so I couldn't handle it.
Try to sprinkle that in, and then, but by the time I sit down, I think, I mean, this is the argument I get most often is, well, you're going to get recognized, which I think is a valid point.
Sure.
I think the anonymous critic, the illusion of the anonymous critic. The anonymous critic is dead.
Yep.
With Instagram,
yeah, it's
and
impossible,
Twitter and all of that. I mean, I meet arguments about Ruth Reichel and Gail Green and how they would put on wigs and that sort of thing. I'm not sure people are kind of half jokingly bringing that up, or
right,
if they just don't realize that, Ruth Reichel wrote for the Times in the early 90s. It's 20 years ago, 25 years ago. The world was a very different landscape. And,
right.
And Gail wrote for the, I think, New York Magazine or something in 1968, which people talk about. It was before internet. No, I think that's probably before the phone book.
For sure.
I mean, that's how long ago this was. So
ridiculous.
I think they all. So I don't think it's honest for the reader, because I think the reader is probably the only person left thinking that whoever's writing this to me is anonymous and thus getting exactly the same treatment as I am.
Right.
There's not really a culture in Norway for comping or treating sort of critics to anything extra. Probably mainly because a lot of them have always been anonymous.
Yep.
But as I say, I'm more likely to be able to get a late night reservation last minute at Catbird Seat in Nashville than I am in Oslo.
Right.
Just because the culture is very different.
Yeah, it was a weird thing. Like, we would send free food out to people all the time at Lysvaka, and it was like, it was very weirdly received amongst the Norwegian guests, because, like you said, it's not really one of those things where it's like, but because like in the States, if you're sitting at a counter and someone sends you like a free dish over, it's like, oh my God, thank you so much. Like, you're being treated as a VIP.
Right.
But in Norway, I feel like it's just kind of like those thing, like, okay, why did you send me this?
Yeah.
Weird.
I have a policy on that. It does happen very rarely, like maybe once or twice a year. I would get so. The most sneaky trick that most of them try to do is so if they have a wine pairing menu, they'll fancy up the wine pairing menu quite quick.
Got it.
After I sit down, and the ones who are smart about it, they'll then do it for the entire dining room.
Okay.
The ones that are a little perhaps cheap in their cleverness, they will just do it for my table, which just makes it very transparent.
Right.
But yeah, maybe once or twice. I would say on average, probably just once a year, I would get an extra dish or something. And
I'm going to slide in a guest question there, because a guest actually asked, how do you handle receiving complimentary food?
Well, I have this little philosophy or idea on that. So if I get a complimentary dish, if it's a good dish or a great dish, I will enjoy it, but it doesn't weigh into my review.
Okay.
Because it's unlikely that a Joe guest will get it.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
But if it's terrible, you're going to get into trouble.
Right.
So there's really no upside to giving me free food.
Okay.
You can only go wrong with it.
Sure.
Yeah. But, I mean, I've traveled a lot and I've worked a lot abroad, so I'm familiar with how it works, and that's a common thing. I think my first sort of VIP experience that's kind of marked me forever was at Per Se. This is going to be 15 years ago.
Wow.
I was working at, this was quite recently after they opened. It was myself and two colleagues from the Michelin-starred restaurant in Oslo, which had only recently lost its Michelin star, and that's why we were all hired.
Sure.
As sort of a push to get it back.
Yep.
We were going to New York for a weekend to eat in a few different places, and I had called an old sort of mentor or acquaintance or friend. It was called Michelle Roux, who runs the Waterside Inn outside of London. They've had 3 stars for probably close to 40 years.
Forever, yeah.
Yeah. And I had called him and sort of asked for tips on how to get tables and that sort of thing. And he had sneakily called these restaurants and said that some friends of mine are coming.
Wow.
Would you please take care of them?
What a hookup.
Yeah, pretty awesome. So we got, and I think at the time Per Se did 10 different dishes and probably a vegetarian 10 course or like a 7 course. I think we got 27 different presentations.
Holy shit.
The 3 of us around the table, none of us got the same, with the exception of the Tweel and the coffees and cream and sort of the staples. But
that's ridiculous.
It was pretty intense. And then one of the most memorable parts of that was my sous chef at the restaurant had said that he had worked at Aquavit prior to coming to Uhu, and so he was kind of the local in New York and kind of knew the landscape. And he said, Per Se is going to be good, but we don't expect anything, innovative or any of that stuff. We're going to see that other places here. And he was served the now kind of iconic quail in a jar.
Okay. I love that dish.
Pretty avant-garde at the time.
Yep. Was this prior or post to your wife being there?
That was prior.
Okay.
This was sort of how I formed connections with them there, and we also had a wedding at Per Se.
That's right.
And a couple of things like that afterwards. So with that sort of kind of original crew, we formed some relationships based on that trip.
Got it.
We actually went to Jean George the next day.
Wow.
And this sous chef, who is a bit of a awkward social person, he's very much a chef's chef, and he had been to Jean George before while working at Aquavit, and Jean George had greeted them at the door.
Wow.
And he said, if he's at the door, I am going to shit myself. And he wasn't, which was very sort of pleasant. And then kind of halfway through the meal, he was with his back towards the kitchen door at Jean George, which is kind of at the far corner of the restaurant. And then I was facing the other way, and we were sort of mid-main course, and I said, "Don't look now. He's coming. He's heading to our table."
Jeez.
And we of course completely lost it. But that trip was really formative to how it used to be. We were just a bunch of I like to call it fry cooks from Norway.
Yep.
And Jean George was genuinely interested in what we thought of his cooking.
That's so great.
And you don't see that anymore.
No. Because everybody has an opinion, you know what I mean? Everybody has an opinion now, and everybody is able to post whatever they want online, and everybody, do you know what I mean? Whereas before, you either had to have a blog or have access to sort of a publication to put your word out there. I mean, that was probably like early days of Twitter, no? And no one was really like tweeting about meals or anything like that.
I think this was before Twitter.
Yeah.
And I think, I'm sorry for going on these rants.
No, it's fine.
But, I was just part of a discussion the other day, I think online somewhere, about someone was saying something about this beautiful camaraderie that is now, which is a crock of, if you pardon my French, a crock of shit.
Yep.
The camaraderie was always there. It just wasn't on Twitter or on Instagram. And these guys like Michel Roux or Jean George or I remember when I had Michel come over to Oslo, or he was in Oslo signing books, and I called him and said, do you mind stopping by the restaurant for a little sort of 5-minute stand up with all the chefs? He said, of course. And he showed up and he said, my name's Michel. You guys have probably never heard of me. I run this little place outside of London, where we at the time had 3 Michelin stars for 30 years. But you've heard of some of the people who've worked for me. So Marco Pierre White, Gordon Ramsay. At the time, Nico Landis was still famous.
Wow.
Pierre Kaufman.
Yep.
And all of these guys worked there at the same time. I mean, this was probably the best brigade that's ever been
Dream team.
together. So, I think that camaraderie's always been there. It's just we make a lot of song and dance about it now. And I'm not sure the camaraderie is really that good. There's a small select group of elitist chefs that pat each other on the back. And I know there's a lot of really talented guys that don't get any airtime.
Right, exactly. What are some misconceptions you think people have about critics and writers and these people that kind of like give their opinion on blogs or online about food?
I'm not sure there's
it's all kind of out there, but
yeah, I'm not sure there's a lot of misconceptions. I think the landscape's certainly changing. I don't think it's changing in the way that people foresaw that it was going to change. So I'm constantly met by the old argument that I'm a dying dinosaur because I'm part of print media.
Got it.
And we don't have any influence or we don't have any sway.
Sure.
And now everyone's a critic and you can go on Yelp, but that kind of thing. And I think you mentioned in a previous episode Jay Rayner's
the Guardian piece,
about Lasagne. And I think the fact that we're discussing it now a month later in a podcast far removed from him is a testament to his influence.
Sure.
And I think more so than we had expected, you are now reliant on those trusted voices just because of the amount of noise that you're getting. There's just so many opinions. You want to make sure that the people you do listen to actually, they might not necessarily know what they're saying, but at least they're consistent.
Yeah, well, the cream rises to the top at a certain point, right? Like.
Yeah, I think so, and I mean we're a fairly small country here, of course. We have a prolific restaurant blogger here, who's a wonderful guy, and he does come out and meet with me every now and then. I don't have that kind of barrier between who's a blogger and who's a critic. So, I mean, we enjoy a good food discussion. He comes with me. He's quite famous. He certainly has a lot more Instagram followers than I do. Right. But I mean, I don't know, maybe 15,000 people read his articles throughout a month, which I think is pretty good. Yep. But then my readership is probably a quarter of the population here throughout the time span of a newspaper.
Crazy.
Or online reviews. So
yep.
Maybe 600,000-700,000 people will read an article. So, of course, there are more people out there with opinions, but I think there's certainly still the sort of established print media reaches a lot further than people think. So The Guardian with Jay Rayner on is a web page that a lot of people go to, much more so than they would go to anyone's blog. I don't think there's any food blog out there that necessarily gets more clicks than The Guardian.
No.
So I mean, that's, you've got to. It is changing, certainly. Sure. And I think the way that people try to make money off of these things, I think one of the misconceptions, of course, is that bloggers. So a lot of bloggers will tell you they don't have any financial gain from doing what they do. So the typical spiel you will get is, I will only write about a place that I enjoy. So if I go to a place and they comp me something, this is the blogger then saying that if I go to a place, they comp me something, I don't like it, I'm not going to write about it. Okay. So a lot of bloggers will have that philosophy. That's sort of a self-fulfilling prophecy. If you do that enough times, you're not going to get invited, and all of a sudden your blog doesn't have anything to write about. Sure. So at some point, you're going to take some kind of liberties with your own morale on that, and that's just human. The other thing is that you commonly hear is I don't have any financial gain from writing my blog, but you'll find a lot of bloggers will be able to parlay their online fame into books or
Sure.
paid appearances somewhere else, or if nothing else, sort of increased social status,
Right.
which comes with having 10,000 followers on Instagram.
Exactly. And
So I don't necessarily think that that the line is so clear cut between the traditional critic and the modern blogger based critic.
It's a platform game, right? More or less. Just where you're kind of like, which channels are you using to tell your story?
Yeah, exactly. Exactly.
Tell me something that you think is true that nobody agrees with you on, like whether or not it's, well, I mean, ideally it's food related or restaurant related, but it can be.
Yeah, so we're not going to go into classic cars.
Yeah, we could rename the
think,
podcast.
If I was going to say something that's true, that no, well, there's no such thing as an emulsion per se.
Yeah, sure.
It's always combined together of something. So I was at a restaurant the other day. My review's not out yet, so let's hope they're not listening. But I was at a restaurant the other day, and they served me a lemon and pepper emulsion.
Got it.
Right. So I'm sure with your esteemed background, you very quickly discerned that that's not possible.
Exactly.
You can't make an emulsion from
lemon and pepper
juice and pepper.
Yeah.
So there's something else that emulsifies this. So I asked the waiter, what's in it? And he said, well, it's pepper and lemon. That's fine.
Yep.
But how do you make it? So he then went into, we use eggs and like a flavorless oil. And so I said, so it's a mayonnaise? And he said, yeah. So it's a lemon and pepper mayonnaise.
Right.
Yeah. Okay.
Okay. Yeah.
So, and I think that's, I'm not sure everyone agrees with that. Also, I think the concept of fermenting doesn't necessarily add anything to a dish.
Right.
Which I think has also become sort of universally true. I was at a small local food festival yesterday, which is called the Chef's Day, and your previous chef, Chris, was there.
Contrast had a little stall or whatever.
Right.
Yeah, okay, got it.
Contrast, a little stall, and a bunch of other people.
Yep.
Where all the sort of Norwegian self-respecting chefs were voting for Chef of the Year, and that sort of thing. It was a nice little outing. Everyone had something fermented.
Okay.
And I'm not necessarily sure that's the best way to bring that kind of flavor profile into every dish.
Right.
And I think, maybe Chris just had something that was pickled. Probably pickled for a very long time, close to being fermented.
Yep. I'm looking at the dishes currently on Liesvaka's Instagram pretty often, and I kind of I see quite a bit the pickles that I literally made last summer on the plates now.
Right.
But which is normally how we would run the kitchen anyways, because it's like at this point in the season, you're only getting kind of like some peas and beans and maybe some rhubarb. So the summer really hasn't started quite yet, and we kind of would structure the kitchen to use the larder at this time of the year. But it's funny to see those things that I made almost a year ago kind of like finally getting on a plate, which I think is interesting.
But this ties into another thing that I've thought a lot about recently, which is if you have a very limited season, like the Norwegian seasons can be, and you have perhaps even more importantly limited creativity. Why does everyone feel like they need to do 12 dishes?
Right.
Why are you not just doing 4 really good ones?
Yep.
Instead of sort of forcing in, and I think this is where we also get into problems with. I now have 3 dishes that I feel quite well, that I feel represent me as a chef quite well, and
Sure.
that I can stand behind, but I need to come up with another 9. And so I go on Instagram and I try to find out what everyone else is doing.
Yep.
And then you have a fair idea of what emulsifying is. You have
Yep.
a fair idea of what fermenting is. And then you see the pictures, and then it kind of
You
ends up on the
hodgepodge.
plate being some sort of version of something that someone else was doing.
I mean, it completely makes sense when you think about, like, are you familiar with the new direction that Noma's going to go in when they reopen, where they're going to kind of like do a lot of like a very shellfish and fish focused winter menu, and then in the summer it's going to be a lot of vegetables, just kind of based on what they have to use at the moment.
Right.
I think it's an interesting place for people to go. Maybe like if you like you said, if you're in the winter and you don't have a lot of stuff to make a really nice menu that you're excited about cooking, cut your menu down to like 6 courses instead of 11. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I'm not sure he's going to end up doing that.
Well, no, because he strictly has the manpower to do it. You know, like he can do one Norwegian mahogany clam per person, sliced into 13 perfect slices, and do it for 65 people a day, because he just has the straight manpower to handle something like that. But you know, when we were maybe like 4 cooks in the kitchen, I was like, how do you navigate around that? I think it's an interesting point.
Yeah, and I think not that anyone's ever going to listen to me, but I think if you can do 4 really good dishes, or 3, I would be much more happy in a place like that than
Right.
I would be in someone who's forcing out 7. I mean, I went to a place quite recently who I feel was guilty of that, where sort of halfway through the meal, I found myself reflecting that I've now had the same dish 4 times.
You showed me these photos. This is funny.
It's just it's just perfectly cooked piece of root vegetable, something pickled, something smoked, and something fermented.
Yep.
And that was just the melody throughout the meal, and it. At some point, it's just, and then of course something crunchy.
Yep.
And I'm thinking this is conceptually a good idea, and individually most of the dishes were fine. But I've had it already.
Yeah, the flow of the meal is just a little bit blah.
Yeah, which I think is I'm gonna sound like I'm telling the people to get off my lawn, but I think that's kind of lost in, and I'm of course dating myself here, but I think that's a little bit lost. The art of the structured meal, and of course I'm getting too old for the 20-course tasting menus altogether.
Yep.
But there's an art form to it, and there was a rhythm, and I remember 15, 20 years ago we were discussing, should the palate cleanser even be included on the menu when you write it up, or should it always be a surprise?
Got it.
And there was like arguments about should the foie gras be before the fish or after the fish? Or how does this really? And you would have constructive discussions about that, and I think now people just don't give a shit.
No.
And I don't think you're going to get foie gras anyway.
It's true.
Because it's a loss.
It's true. So this is actually a really good segue. We've talked about it already, but the dining landscape now globally, I mean, you can talk about Norway or the US respectively, but it's at a bit of a standstill. However, the economy is still fine and people are still going out to eat. Everybody seems to be redoing their kitchens, like 11 Madison Park is going under renovation. French Laundry just did theirs. Right. And we have this ebb and flow of trends with platforms like Instagram being able to provide kind of like the bang and sizzle effect that we've talked about. What do you think is next for going out to eat? What would you, if you had to kind of make a prediction?
Wow, that's a big.
It doesn't have to be
big and bold prediction,
right? It doesn't have to be fine dining or casual. You can pick one or the two, but
I think these predictions always tend to be some sort of it's almost like a make a wish
Yep.
for what you want
Yep.
the landscape to be, more than, because I don't think we can reliably make assertions as to what it's going to end up being.
Sure.
I'm hoping for casual to become casual again.
Yep.
And not a fashion statement.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I went to a place the other day where it was in the middle of winter in Norway. There was slushing snow outside, and the waiter was wearing cargo shorts, a hoodie, and an ill-fitted cap with sneakers, black sneakers, brown socks. and at some point, the maitre d' was also wearing a football jersey or a soccer jersey from the employee team of Noma, to just point out that he had worked there, I think.
Right.
And at some point, this is becoming a conscious decision for you to, this is what I'm going to put on. There's no way that these were the things that just were at the front of your
Sure.
So I'm hoping for casual to become casual again.
Yep.
And for me not to feel like a granddad Andre when I go to these places.
Right.
It actually becomes down to earth. I'd like for things to be sort of flavor driven.
Mm-hmm. As opposed to ingredient driven, how it is.
Exactly.
Okay, got it. Got it.
So, because now I find that we're using a lot of ingredients that we don't necessarily need to be using.
Mm-hmm.
Again, also because we're forcing too many menu items on there, you end up with ingredients that aren't really that brilliant or that you don't master.
Sure.
So, sort of a flavor-driven, harmonious dishes with a kind of down-to-earth, actual casualness to it. But not saying these restaurants don't exist, and they were more prevalent probably 5-10 years ago. I'm hoping there's a cyclical sense to this, and there'll be a renaissance of that. I think we've talked about Chicago.
Yep.
I think brunch at Avec kind of
sure
embodies what I'm talking about.
Okay.
There's and perhaps brunch at Avec 5 years ago. There's probably too many hipsters there at the moment. But, yeah.
True.
Yeah. So that's where I hope it's gonna go. I think fine dining is gonna come back with a bang.
Yep.
The formal sense, which is then at the other end of the spectrum, the formal ritual part of the meal is probably going to come back.
I'm with you on that as well.
And we're gonna have problems with that because we don't have people to deal with it. We don't have,
as far as like staff or
maitre-d's.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Mm-hmm.
We've got a whole generation of front of house people who don't know how to make a dry martini.
Right. Who have gone casual in a lot of ways.
Exactly.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, I went to hotel school in Switzerland, so of course I am a little bit of granddad Andre.
Sure.
But we had to wear suits in school, and companies like the Four Seasons would be recruiting there, and I've always been opinionated, so I had a bit of a rebellion towards this. And the resident manager of sort of the boarding part of the school said that we recruit for Four Seasons or the Hard Rock Cafe, but it's a lot easier to get used to wearing jeans again.
Got it.
Is to get used to looking good in a suit if you go work for the Four Seasons. And I think we're at a place now where people are used to wearing jeans and or parts of a jean.
Right.
And then I'm not sure how that's gonna translate into the finer parts of fine dining.
Well, I mean, we have to see where it's going to go, I guess. Like, it's just a prediction. I'm firmly with you that I think fine dining is going to have a resurgence, and it's going to be this thing where casual has to go more casual based on just like the economy, the cost of it, and the sheer like becoming a commodity, more or less. And like I'm sure you guys are experiencing it too with the delivery service, where you no longer have to go to a physical dining room to get this casual food.
Right.
I think that's also going to play a huge factor going forward, where you don't have to have a restaurant in the traditional sense to serve food as on the casual end. and that will kind of make...
I mean, that even exists on the fine dining part of the spectrum. I mean, we have a former Bocuse d'Or winner here in Oslo, and a former Michelin-starred chef who's had 2 Michelin-starred restaurants.
Sure.
Who only does private parties.
Got it. So he'll come to you.
Right.
I mean, yeah. What gets better than that?
He'll come to you and make quail and langoustines and caviar and that sort of stuff. And I'm sure it's pricey.
Yeah, of course, because I mean you're paying for the individual, but yeah. I hear you. Did you?
If you're eating or if you're drinking $10,000 bottles of wine, I'm not sure that the cost of the chef is
it's second nature at that point.
Right.
Did you end up thinking of a little outside of the industry something we can leave people with? Whether it's not something that you've read this week.
I gotta say, I don't. My mind's been firmly in the industry. In the last sort of week and a half.
Yeah.
Just finished off a couple of restaurant projects here, and I'm just so immersed in that world. I was hoping for you to sort of spice my life up.
Yeah.
Outside of the industry.
Let's see. What have I been dealing with lately? Have you? Let's see. No, that's an industry one. What am I excited about right now? I've just been getting outside quite a bit, actually. The weather's finally shaping up now, and I've been kind of like, I went on a really nice run yesterday. It's really nice to see people outside, and I feel like that is something that we should just do more, especially like because we spend our lives inside when we're in the kitchen or writing, or I mean I'm sitting at a desk right now looking out a window and it's beautiful outside, so that's definitely next on my list. So maybe
you're in the right place for it though.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah, but I mean Norwegian summers are great.
Yeah,
you can't argue with that.
You spent some time in Bergen. I always say that summer is normally the best day of the year.
Right.
Bergen.
It's true. It's so true. Yeah. So that'll be our non-industry piece today. Just you guys should get outside for like 10 minutes.
Yeah, and I'm sure they can download this on iTunes.
Yeah, sit outside and listen. It's perfect.
It's going to be long enough for a nice brisk walk in nature.
That's perfect. Where can people find you as far as like social platforms you like to plug?
I was an early adopter of Twitter. I've gone off it. So the best place to find me is normally on Instagram.
Yep, got it.
At being critical.
Yep.
I maintain a webpage which is not really a blog in the sense that it's not really dynamic. You can find some of my old musings on there. I'm gonna write up something soon, I think, about this. Why do people think they need to have that many items on the menu? Because I feel a rant coming on.
For sure.
But Instagram is normally where you can find me, and you can see where I might be in the world, which tends to be anywhere from Tokyo to Las Vegas. Which, by the way, bringing it all the way back full circle is one of those things that I know to be true that most people don't agree on. Las Vegas, highly underrated as a dining destination.
True story, because you can get whatever your little heart desires.
Exactly, and if you don't mind paying a premium, let's face it, mid-range is going to be more expensive than Kansas City. But if you don't mind paying a premium, there's nowhere on the planet there's more choice for upper mid-range.
Love it. So thank you so much. This has been episode 14 of the Emulsion, and regardless of kind of if you've been watching live on Facebook or if you're on YouTube watching post recording or if you're on the podcast on iTunes, I want to thank everybody for listening. I want to thank Andre for being on. It was super great to have you. I hope you
for having me.
Enjoyed it as much as I did. Yeah, for sure. Go ahead and share this podcast on one of your social networks. I know there's someone in your life or someone that you work with that could use a little bit more industry knowledge. Go ahead and tag me or at Being Critical and use hashtag the Emulsion, and we will be sure to say hello to you. I guess we look forward to hearing from you. Thanks in advance. I'm Justin Khanna, and this is Andre. Have a good one.
Ciao.
Perfect.